I'm saying this because when you look at this image, Steiner talks about price. He doesn't talk about true price. And therefore, it's very important in economics generally not to think that Steiner is setting up a parallel universe. He's looking at the same problem all economists have. How do prices arise? And then what's interesting here, first of all, you get this epistemology, which is the same image as here. This little man who's trying to understand the economy is now Mr. Price, and he's trying to understand where he came from. And in this image, Steiner says, you are the result of, or the interaction between two values. You're a combination of value 1 and value 2. These two value streams combine into price. So what is he saying about this? Well, there's two things I want to say, or three things I want to say about this. First of all, as I've already said, this is an image of epistemology. You are Mr. Price now. You have to realize that you result from two streams of value, not one. Most economics is based on the labor theory of value, which we get, unfortunately, from Aristotle, who, in my view, made a mistake. But we all think, whether we're Marxists or neoliberals, whether on the left or the right, everybody accepts economics is based on the labor theory of value. All value derives from labor. And Steiner said that's not the case. Some value derives from labor, and this is an example of this. I'll go into it in more detail. Other value relies from the way we organize our labor. So I give the example, if you're going to dig if you're in a garden and you want to dig a trench for potatoes or something, when you start out digging, you've got to go down two spits, two depths of spade to prepare the soil properly so the potato can do what it has to do. And you start out as a human being and you go 1, 2, then you go 1, 2, and after a while you get bored. So maybe you go to the other end of the trench and you just start that end, and eventually you'll have a trench. But the human being cannot do it like a machine would do it. It's always going to be saying, this is boring. Can I just make it more interesting, or can I be more efficient, and so on? And it's not as silly an example as you might think. You have to be able to experience somehow that when we do stuff, when we, in Steiner's language, when we transform nature or earth into something, like when we chop down a tree because we're going to make a chair, we wouldn't be doing that if we didn't have the idea of making a chair in our minds already. So we don't see that all the action we have of taking hold of nature, as he calls it, of working with the land in order to produce a product, we don't see that would make no sense. It would never happen if we didn't have the intention, in this example, of creating a chair to sit on. Otherwise, a tree will remain a tree. It won't even become a log. And so he's making this distinction. And I think it's important to be careful with this point, because this is a really good example. Again, I speak anecdotally, meaning it's a true experience, but I'm not going to cite where it comes from necessarily, or I'm not going to put it in the paper. But the experience is real. When I was arguing this point professionally, what I call Steiner's twin theory of value, not just labor, but the organizing of labor, these two things combined into price. When I was saying this, someone said, why does he make it so complicated? We all know that. And then this person said, you should read David Hume. And I thought, what? David Hume, he's kind of, he's one of these terrible pre-economics philosophers who made it all wrong in the first place. But they're so Baconian, they're so kind of narrow-minded. And then this person, he in fact wrote me an email, says, if you read David Hume carefully, and then he sent me a link to a very famous paper in 1976, if you read this Hume's theory of labor, you'll see it is Steiner's twin value theory. It's just that Hume doesn't make it complicated. But he said, but what this person said to me, and this very serious person in finance said, it's obvious that you can't chop a tree down unless you're planning to make a chair. It's so obvious, there's no point mentioning it. And I say that because it's very interesting. Yes and no. You know, there are things which are so obvious you don't mention them, but then they remain half-spoken, and then they take on a life. So this is a very subtle thing. This is someone who's very, very well known, very well placed, very influential in finance. When he met Steiner on this level of technicality, Steiner's twin, me saying Steiner had a twin value theory, his reaction was, why does he make it so complicated? Not, I disagree. But again, I think it's an English example, what some people call Newtonian. It's so obvious we don't mention it, but in not mentioning the obvious, we leave a bit out. And then as Goethe might have said, if you don't state the whole truth, a half-truth invades human consciousness. And you live with a half-truth, which then, of course, becomes the truth. So again, I'm saying this because if you locate Steiner in this whole epistemological challenge we have in these times, he becomes fairly easily understandable. He's never saying anything like this in his economics lectures, so I'm saying it on his behalf. Because I think from my experience, if you don't get the situation we find ourselves in, then you won't get what he's talking about. You might get it in abstract trope terms. You can quote, you can cherry pick all the nice, you know, 3 kinds of money and other little things you might want to say, but you couldn't give a lecture about that because you actually don't know what he's talking about. And you don't know the context into which he was speaking. So, so again, to come to the focus of associative economics is necessarily on price, not necessarily on true price in these terms, but on price and how do we understand price? And therefore he's kind of saying, are you sure, you other economists, are you sure the way you think leads you to a true understanding of price? He hardly speaks in this way because one thing he's very clear about, he doesn't hypothesize because he would say, if I can see something clearly, why would I make a hypothesis out of it? So I get Steiner doesn't do hypotheses because in his view, if you can think clearly, you see things. If you see there's a bull coming towards you down the street, you don't make a hypothesis of this fact. You manage it. This is not an example from him, it's an example from me. But if you're in a world where you can't see clearly because you're thinking inductively or deductively or both, then you're stuck because you cannot perceive anything. You put in front of yourself a projection of what you think is there, and then what's actually there is occluded from you. So his point is, since I can think clearly, why would I hypothesize? It is like this. And he wouldn't put anything in the interrogative. But in an English mind, especially in economics, I long ago learnt, although I haven't necessarily mastered the skill, if you want to make a very strong statement, it's best made in the interrogative. So the more you believe in something, the less you say it like that. The more you say, and this is what I do in professional context, the more I say, are you sure about the conclusion of your statement? Or are you sure that this statement matches one you made 10 minutes ago? I hardly ever say anything in professional discussions except things like this, because it's all the epistemology. And if you can catch someone on their epistemology and help them with their epistemology, then they're going to, you know, in a way, find their way to the lectures that Steiner gave by way of a statement. But many English people have told me that is the biggest problem they have with Steiner. He says things, and then I can't find it for myself. So in everything I'm saying in these podcasts, I'm not really speaking to anyone other than those who are really embedded in English and embedded in finance as conducted in English. Because unless you can kind of sort this one out, you're never going to get a hearing for Steiner. Never. Not in my opinion.
This concept of price, or we want to call it true price, just to distinguish something there. Would it be true to say that it's very far from what's going on today? Can we say that? What's commonly going on today?
I would say yes and no. Yes, on the surface, but if I give a very specific example that I'm involved in one of the things I do, if you look at the economics of farming, for example. I've been involved in this for all my life, for 50 years or so. And in one way or another, either selling vegetables or trying to find a market for organic product, or running an organic farm, or even plowing the field. I've had a lot of things to do with this. I've had whole food shops. My wife still has a whole food shop underneath where I'm giving this talk, for example. So I've been at this for 50 years or more. And I've also been on organic standards committees and all kinds of things. So, and my experience there with a lot of farms and farming problems is everyone says the problem's in the price, that the market price is not enough for the organic or in the Steiner world or biodynamic way of doing things. And I say, I haven't seen that argument. I hear the argument, but I don't see the logic of it, because if I look at your farm and I look at your farm as a business, I often see you bought land way above the price just because you fancy the landscape or something. So you didn't, the price you pay for the land is already broken your balance sheet, given what you're going to have to produce out of this land, because you either paid for two reasons. Either you paid too high because you fell in love with the land, or a more fundamental problem, the land has a value anyway. And so often in my view, economic land has no value. But if you say it has a value and then you pay for this value, you've caused a huge problem that you will never overcome. If you buy something, if I swap cash for a piece of land, and if I borrowed this cash from the bank, now I'm paying 5% or whatever forever on this cash, and I bought nothing. So it builds in a structural problem which no balance sheet will ever overcome. And on top of that, many farmers I know have bought land above the price because they were either innocent or ignorant or I don't know what. I could tell you many examples, but I won't go into detail. And so one thing which is affecting the ability of a market price to cover their expenses is they pay too much for their land in the first place, and no price will ever overcome this problem, market price or true price even. You can say the similar thing about the capital they borrowed. Often the capitalization of a farm is breaking their balance sheet from the minute they enter into the agreement. And so in a lot of things I do with farm ownership issues, for me, the key question is, if you, just as a what if you look at any particular farm and really analyze its finances, accounting, and so on, if you take out the fake pricing of the land in that case, or you take out the fake pricing, meaning the cost of capital and the cost of land, which are not real in economic terms, if you take those out, more or less the market price is fine.
Yeah.
It's not, the problem isn't with the market price, it's with these costs you're carrying, which have no economic reality.
Yeah.
And so most people start, the market is terrible, we have to change, we have to make an argument. Organic is worth 25% more, so you premium price, and you play this whole game, which solves nothing structurally. When what you should be solving, you have to remove these fake costs from the balance sheet of the farm. I wouldn't give any high ground to the pricing problem. I don't think that's where the problem is. The problem is in what I call misdescriptions of reality. So if you say, for example, land has value, this is not the case. So if you insist on this, worse if you buy it, right? If you swap land value for cash and you make this a real thing, you've got a problem beginning with a misdescription. Similarly with capital and when we get into labor, because in strict economic terms, Steiner doesn't admit the notion of factors of production, because he says land, labor, and capital, the so-called factors of production. This isn't the way he says it, this is the way I'm saying it for him. The so-called factors of production, land, labor, and capital, are only that if you think land, labor, and capital are commodities. Since he says they are not commodities, and we can get into that later, there are no markets in land, labor, and capital. By definition, they're not for sale. That's a huge problem. And so he's got rid of the notion of not only land, labor, and capital as commodities, but with that goes the whole notion of factors of production. With that goes the whole notion that they are costs on your set of accounts. That is so complicated, most people can't figure it out. where do I put the expenses, where do I put rent if land isn't a commodity? Is this a real expense or is this a balance sheet problem? It becomes so complicated, most people just don't want to go there. But having got rid of all that, he says, and now we can say, since land, labor, and capital are not commodities and there are no markets for these things, we can now more accurately describe what our misdescriptions are occluding from us. And then he comes into the whole world of factors of price formation.
Yeah.
So this is it's a very technical point I'm making. You just have to lose this notion of factors of production. You cannot lose it if you think land, labor, and capital are commodities. So this is axe blow after axe blow at the foundation of all modern economic theory, just one thing after another. But he says if you do this, so to speak, you will then see what's coming towards you. You will see there are factors of price formation, not factors of true price formation, just what is it that gives rise to price? But you get there by just demolishing these fake assumptions. And so it's not for me a question about price, true or otherwise. It's a question of why do we think land has value when it doesn't? And what is the consequence of paying for that value if it's not real? This is, we can get into similar things with capital, but that's where the discussion is going. Also with capital, why do we pay for something? Why do we treat as commodities two things which aren't? And if we don't understand this, the rest follows. So I never begin with a pricing problem. It's not where the problem is. The problem is here. It's much more existential when it's here because you can't solve, the way economics solve this problem, it just is okay. You allocate scarce resources by the price mechanism. Well, I've got rid of mechanism in my podcast so far. I'm not going to go back there again. So I'm already trying to find the trope behind Steiner's because I've denied myself the price mechanism as the solution because it was not going to solve, no amount of price, if I want to accept land has a value and pay for it, the price is going to go up and up and up and up forever because I bought something which didn't have a value. Same for capital. So I will place the problems there in our discussion, and the prices I think will be what they will be.